there is a huge amount of people who are killed every year behind the wheel. It's one of the leading causes of death is these car accidents. So people know to get their oil changed at 3,000 miles. However, a lot of people do not know when to get their brakes done. They do not have a set mileage on the life of brake pads, but it is around 30,000 miles. So Honda of Temecula let my mom drive for 145,000 miles before they changed the rear brake pads. So I've been looking over her invoices, and it's documented on her invoice again and again and again. It says over and over again that customer reports a grinding noise. Customer reports difficulty stopping. Customer requests that you check her brakes because there is a problem with her brakes. So Honda of Temecula let her go 145,000 miles on the same rear brake pads. And then they finally changed them. They would change the brake pads on the front every 45,000 or 50,000 miles. But they never replaced the rear brake pads for 145,000 miles. And in my opinion, at that point, the rear rotors had been damaged. So they put new rear pads on the rear brakes, but left the rotors alone. In my opinion, the rear rotors needed to be replaced at that time. So around a year later, my mother gave the vehicle to me. I began taking it in to the Honda dealership in Keene, New Hampshire. So I have an invoice that says it was first brought in July of 2018, and it had 164,000 miles on it. Then the next invoice is around 1 year later in June of 2019, and at that point it has 170,000 miles on it. And the service advisor's name was Jeremy Brown. And I asked Jeremy to go over the whole vehicle because I was about to take a trip with my family. So I said, please go over the entire vehicle and let me know everything that needs to be replaced. So it is written on the invoice that they did a multi-point vehicle inspection, and they replaced the power steering pump, and they put in new brake fluid. So I guess everything else checked out at that point when the vehicle had 170,000 miles on it. So in August of 2020, about 1 year after I had asked Jeremy Brown to go over everything, I have the vehicle back at Honda, and I asked them to change over the winter tires. And at that point they said that the rear brake pads had seized onto the rear rotors. And I think that that is due to them having my mom drive around on the same rear pads, drive around on the same rear rotors for 145,000 miles. And that ended up damaging the rear rotors. But instead of replacing the rear rotors, they just put new brake pads on the rear. So they had new brake pads installed over defective rotors, over old rotors that needed to be replaced. So after doing that, about 30,000 miles later, the rear brake pads have now seized on the rear rotors. So I think that exposes that the rotors were defective. But Honda will not admit to that. So as you listen to these next two phone calls, I want you to listen to how these people sound, especially Dave Vaught, who is the service manager of Honda of Keene. And he not only sounds that this is very ordinary and commonplace for his customers to be driving around on seized brakes, but he seems rather confident and pleased with their track record. They are making up every excuse that they possibly can to explain away why things are the way they are. They are neglecting to do what they are asked to do. They are lying to me. And if I did not ask them to take off the tires and switch over the winter tires, I would still be driving around on seized brakes.
Thank you for calling Honda of Keene. If you know your party's extension, you may dial it at any time.
John, I'm afraid I think I'm going to have them call you back. I can't seem to get any of them.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, what's a good phone number for you?
Hello, you've reached John.
Hello.
Hello, is this Mr. Harwood?
Yes, sir.
It's Dave over here at Honda. I had a message to call you.
Yes, sir. Do you have that invoice up? I just had a couple of quick questions about it. I could give you that number again if you like.
I do. I got the invoice right here in my hand. What's up with it?
Okay, real quick. When you guys say that the rear pad seized, what causes that?
When we say that the rear pads what?
Have seized.
What causes that? It can be a lot of things that could cause it. From what I'm looking at here, it looks like we replaced the pads and rotors. So usually what's going to cause them to seize is the pads have seized inside the slides. So the pads sit on a bracket. It's called the slide bracket of the caliper. And if they get, dirt, corrosion, rusting going on, the pad will seize in that slide and won't be able to move back and forth. So you step on the brake and the pad goes in, and it's supposed to naturally slide back a little bit. They get seized in there if they run out of grease. The new laws we have to have grease that dissipates in 2 years, so we can't put on as much grease as like we used to be able to, and the grease isn't near the consistency as it used to be. So it wears out over time, and those pads will get stuck in there again. With COVID, people aren't driving near as much, so the car does a lot of sitting, and not necessarily saying yours is doing that, but the cars do a lot of sitting, so the pads get stuck in there, and then they seize up in there from the dirt and the corrosion and whatnot. So that's usually what happens when we say that the pads are seized, or the brakes are seized in the slides, causing them need to be replaced. So they'll do once they seize in there, it's basically like you're sitting there riding the brake. Once you use the brake the one time, they close shut, and then they just sit there and rub on that rotor, getting it hot. A lot of times getting it to where it needs to be replaced, where it's burned it off.
Yeah, Shane said that he did not recommend I drive it once you guys found out that the pads were seized. So the next step after they're seized is they fail and you get into a car accident, huh?
It can happen, absolutely.
Okay, so how often do you recommend that the rear brakes, the rotors, get resurfaced?
Let me answer this 2 ways. So, we don't recommend that they be resurfaced unless they're getting hot. What I would rather answer the question with is how often should you do the maintenance on the brakes on both the front and or rear? I would say annually, depending on how much you drive, especially with, if you got a lot of dirt road driving to deal with, at least once a year have it in here where we take everything apart, clean it up, re-grease it, put it back together. If the rotors need to be resurfaced, we would look at it at that point, but if they're done annually, where you just take everything apart and re-grease it, you wouldn't necessarily have to resurface the rotors all the time.
Okay, so you want it to be you think it should be maintained every 20,000 miles. You should bring it in and have it looked at, huh?
If you're doing 20,000 miles in a year, absolutely.
Okay.
And we usually look at them like if you're seriously doing that many miles in a year, you figure that's 4 oil changes you've been in here for.
Huh.
And we look at them every time it comes in, so we would be able to catch that, usually before the fact, before it starts getting stuck in there, and we say, hey, we notice the pads are getting a little bit stuck or starting to stick. Recommend maybe on your next service to definitely get them done, or this service definitely get them done. But absolutely annually, either in the spring or in the fall, get them taken apart and cleaned up and made to move freely.
That sounds good, Dave, that you would recommend to all your customers to get that done, because that makes driving a lot more safe.
Absolutely. Stopping is usually a priority.
Right. My only concern is with a gentleman named Jeremy Brown. So Jeremy was real polite and everything, and it was last summer, 2019, and I brought it in and I said I was going to take my family up to the White Mountains, so if he could go over the whole car and let me know everything that needs to be replaced or fixed, because I did not want it to break down my whole family in the car.
Right.
So he found a lot of stuff, and he even recommended that we replace the brake fluid.
Yeah, that's recommended every 3 years.
Right.
On Honda, they recommend that every 3 years.
So my only concern is that 8,000 miles later, my rear brakes have completely seized, and I need to have the rotors replaced.
Right.
And so the front rotors had to be resurfaced, and the rear rotors had to be replaced, and the rear pads had seized onto the vehicle.
Okay.
So why didn't Jeremy recommend that I get those repaired back in the summer of 2000?
Let me take a look at your history here, so I'm not
Okay, I have that.
leading you astray here, so hang on.
Yes, I could give you that invoice with Jeremy's name on it if you like.
I want to look at the time frame here, or the timeline here, so.
Yep.
You were here in June 25th of 2020. We looked over your car. So the time before that we saw you was July 17th of 2019. So just 11 months later, and you went 6,000 miles roughly. I show 6515. So
Okay.
now that's going from July 17th of 19 to the next time that you arrived, 625 of 20.
Right.
And that was when the car's been driving, but you're gonna start and letting it run during the winter, and it was consuming oil. That was that concern. So you hadn't been driving it very much. What happens again, where I was going with is, if you're not driving the car and it does a lot of sitting, we live in New England, everything rusts. If you're not moving, things are starting to bind together. So it's very possible that that's what was going on.
Yeah, I drive it almost. I drive it almost every day, sir. It doesn't sit there.
Okay, but you figure in 1 year from 7/17 of 19 to 6/25 of 20, so 11 months, it went 6,500 miles. Yes, you drove it, but it didn't get driven a lot. And we've been seeing that a lot lately with cars not being driven a lot. Things are getting stuck in there. And the pads, the grease, like I said, the grease isn't the same grease we used 15 years ago. Due to the new laws and the EPA and stuff like that, we aren't allowed to use grease that will last forever. It has to dissipate.
Oh, okay. It just seems unusual that in 6,000 miles it goes from it needs a little bit of brake fluid to all the rotors have to be replaced because they've seized on there.
Well, the rotors had to be replaced in the rear because they were getting hot due to the seizing of the pads. And the front ones we just resurfaced the front ones, and we're able to clean those up because we caught them before they got too bad and required being replaced.
Yeah, it just seems that it will go from A to Z. You know what I mean? Not so quickly like that. There would be some steps in between. You need new brake fluid to. You need all the rotors replaced. There seems to be a few steps missing in there. So that would have been nice if Jeremy caught that before it goes from you need a little bit of brake fluid to you need all your rotors replaced because the brake pads have seized. So I don't understand how driving the car less and putting less wear and tear on the brakes actually hurts the vehicle, Dave.
It absolutely does because it went through the winter that way. It just sits there and the stuff corrodes together. I mean, if you have a piece of raw metal, which when you have brakes done or anything of that nature, the brake surface on there, if you were to take it out for a good drive and do some good hard braking, it would make that surface on the rotors nice and shiny and clean. Now, if you did that on a Friday morning and you let your car sit for the entire weekend and you went out and moved it on Monday, you would see the surface of that front rotor would have rust spots all over it. Now,
okay,
say that happens for an entire week or 2 weeks during the wintertime when it's snowbound on there. That's what happens. The rotors get rusted on there. I mean, I've had some cars on the lot where they'll sit for a couple of days or even a weekend, and you go to try to move them, and you actually have to give the car gas to break it free from that pad and the rotor because it's rusted and corroded enough that it's stuck onto the rotor until you pop it free. Then you drive it, you step on the brake hard a couple of times, and it cleans that surface off.
So Dave, according to you and Honda, is if you drive the car less, it's going to be worse for the wear and tear on your brakes.
Not necessarily Honda. I mean, I worked at Subaru for 7 years, and we had the same issue with Subaru. I know if I let my truck sit in my
Okay, why do you keep on saying I'm letting my car sit there? I drive only locally, and I put 8,000. Many people will say that you're doing justice to the car by putting on such low mileage every year. So normal is 20. That year was a low one because I had all local errands and local work to do. So I would think most people would be like, that helps the car putting less miles on it. So in the world of Honda, that actually hurts everything, putting less miles on it. I've never heard that before, sir.
I'm not saying in the world of Honda. I'm just saying we live in New England. Things that are of metal that sit and don't move, don't get friction on them, tend to get rusty and surface rust. And that's unfortunately what happens with the brakes and
Okay, Dave, I would understand that if I let the car sit there. I would accept that as a reason, but since I did not let the car sit there, it's kind of hard for me to accept that. But I would understand how that would work if you leave the car sitting there for a length of time. That's what I read on the internet, that oftentimes they rust on there when you leave the car sitting there for a long period of time, which I did not. So I was curious of any alternative reasons why they would be seized on there. My other guess is because they hadn't been replaced or maintained or suggested to be replaced or maintained in many years by Honda. That might be another way that the brake pad seize on there when Honda neglects to tell their customers that they need to replace those brakes. That's another one of my ideas of why that might happen. Could you confirm that or no?
I can't confirm that. I mean, I'm trying to look back at your history here. I only have starting history in this car of July of 18. You're at 164,000 miles.
Yeah, we had the
maintenance between then. I see the brake fluid that was indeed changed in 2019. So I don't see, prior to that, I don't see any sort of brake work that was taken care of short of the brake fluid service that was recommended by the age and time of the vehicle.
Yes, sir. I have the file here. We had the car in California, and we also brought it to the Honda of Temecula in California. So they also felt that we never needed any work done on the back brakes. So it's kind of like a ongoing thing with Honda.
Two different climates here. California being relatively dry versus New England being, things that sit here will tend to rust versus things that sit in California don't tend to rust.
Okay, but the whole thing is, sir, is if Honda were to take off the tires and see that the brakes need to be fixed, it's that easy to understand that. It's that easy to see that. It's just not in the world of philosophy or some sort of hypothetical thing about when the brakes need to be repaired. You could easily take off the tire and see. So I'm glad that your company finally caught it, on August 5th of 2020. It just seems that they were in very bad shape and it had been neglected by Honda going back many years. And I have all the invoices here. So I just wanted to get your opinion on when the rotors in the rear had to be resurfaced or maintained. And you say almost every year.
Not resurfaced. The brakes need to be annually maintained as far as to get the best life out of them and to make sure things are working freely. My recommendation, and I do the same thing to my vehicle, is annually take them apart, clean them up, re-grease them, put them back together. It vastly extends the life of the brake pads.
So you do that for your own vehicle, or you're a mechanic, right?
I'm not a mechanic. I'm the service manager, but I've worked in automotive dealerships for almost 30 years now.
So my question then, Dave, is why does my mom and then I bring it into you guys to have it checked out every year, and for many years nobody recommends that we get the back brakes done?
Oh, because if they are moving freely, I mean, I put on the normal amount of mileage every year. I got almost 70,000 miles out of my front brake pads, and I just replaced them last weekend. So I have on my rears on my truck, I have almost 176,000 miles on the truck right now, and I've never replaced them. And I bought the truck when it had 65, so I've got 110,000 miles on the rear brake pads, and I haven't replaced them yet.
Okay, so I guess that's the way it is. I guess that
moving freely. If we take a look at your car and we look at it and the things are moving freely, we don't necessarily say, hey, if they're moving freely, you don't need to take them back apart again and do anything to them if the grease is in there. And that's my speculation, because I wasn't here at that time when Jeremy did the repair order in 2019. But they saw that everything was working freely at that point. They saw the brake fluid hadn't been changed, at least from their history, what they could see, so that was their recommendation at that time. Now you advance a year later, 8,000 miles, and at this point, we've seen a lot of cars this spring and summer and fall that the brakes are getting stuck in the slides. Due to a lot of them due to the vehicle not moving near as much. Now, whether it's greater than every day or driven once a week or only driven a few miles, whatever the scenario, it can happen. Whether it's a Honda, a Subaru, a Ford, a Chevy, they're all susceptible to metal seizing together and pads sticking in there.
Okay, it seemed that Honda recommended that we had the front pads replaced and the front rotors resurfaced approximately every 45 or 50,000 miles. They were doing that, but they never recommended that we do that for the rear brakes. And then when we get up to this high mileage, then I hear that they're seizing. So it's like it's coming out of left field here, and you're saying that it could have happened all at once. Well, that's a little hard to believe. My guess is that it happened gradually over the hundreds of thousands of miles I put on here. The mileage when you guys did that work was 178,000. So I don't think that its season came out of left field. It was fine 8,000 miles ago, and now it went to hell in 8,000 miles.
In 8,000 miles in a year, yes.
Okay, so the rear brakes were fine. They did not need to be maintained for 150,000 miles, and then they finally went bad in the last 6,000 miles. That doesn't make much sense to me, but I understand that is is what you're going to state on behalf of Honda. I understand that.
Not on behalf of Honda. It's just on whether it was Honda or, like I said, Honda, Subaru, Infiniti. It doesn't matter. I'm looking at the car. I'm not looking at the manufacturer of it. I'm looking at what's going on with the brakes. Doesn't matter whether it's on a lawnmower or your Honda Odyssey or a Honda Fit or a Subaru Justy what's going on is the brakes are seizing in the slides because they're metal on metal. And if there's not enough grease on them, because the grease dissipates over time, it's going to cause the brakes to seize metal on metal.
Okay, so in your opinion, everything's working smoothly with Honda and what you're recommending your customers to do, to drive around with seized brakes?
I'm not recommending them to drive around with seized brakes.
Okay, well, it's lucky that I brought it in on August the 5th and asked you to take off the snow tires. And then you guys finally saw that I needed new brakes because the rear tires had seized. Because I had been bringing it to your company for a year or two, and no one saw that before. Even when I asked them to check everything, and Jeremy said everything was fine. So you're saying everything is working fine. It couldn't work better for you. But it's not working so good with me when I'm driving around with seized rear tires. The next point after that is you could get into a car accident. And if you look at the statistics, do you know how many people die in car accidents every year? It's a huge number. So it sounds real good when you say, I recommend that people get their brakes serviced every 20,000 miles. And then I say, why wasn't that offered to me? And you say, well, that's just the way it is.
No, I didn't say that's just the way it is. I'm saying...
Well, you give me 1,000 excuses of why it's like that, sir. It's 1,000 excuses from you then, sir.
I'm not giving an excuse. I'm saying that's not what I said. I never said that that's just the way it is. I'm saying if we looked at it and it was moving freely, we don't recommend work that does not need to be done.
Okay, and my point is that I don't think it just came out of left field. That's the nature of wear and tear on the engine as things gradually get worse, sir. And you guys have been recommending that we replace the front brake pads and resurface the rotors, and no one has said anything about the back. And finally, I luck out by saying change the snow tires, please. And you guys find out the brakes could not be worse in the back. And then you say, well, it probably just happened recently like that. I find that hard to believe, sir.
I'm continuing to look over your history while we're looking at this.
Yep. Okay, one last question, sir. What is safe to drive with the millimeters? 7 millimeters is the, it means that there's no wear on the brake pad, right?
2 millimeters is what's considered failing.
Okay. So you want to have it replaced when it gets around, what would you say, 3.5? Or you would wait to
When
about
it gets
2?
down to 2 millimeters, that's when I would replace it.
When it gets to the point of... When it gets...
2 to 3 millimeters will still get you almost 5,000 miles, depending on if they're moving freely.
Okay, so at 2 millimeters, sir, you said it's failing. So you would wait till the brakes are failing before you recommend that
2 millimeters is what fails for state inspection purposes.
Ah. Okay. What does glazing mean? I've read it on a few invoices that there was some glazing on the brakes. What does that mean, sir?
Glazing on the brake pad and or rotor.
Yes, sir.
Usually where the surface is getting hot and it's no longer making proper contact with the brake pad and or rotor. Therefore, it'll get a glazed finish to it.
And so how do you deglaze it, sir?
You don't deglaze the pad. If it had enough life on it, you could scuff the surface so it's back to, it takes the glaze off, but with a rotor, you would have to resurface the rotor on the brake lathe.
Okay. And what does SARE stand for? SARE.
You're looking at this on the RO?
On one of the invoices, it says that SARE is discussing the amount of wear on a brake pad. It says the SARE is 6 millimeter on rear brake.
Trying to see where you're seeing this, so hang on 1 second.
Okay.
What's the RO number that you're looking at that on?
Yeah, it's for the Temecula dealership, sir.
It's for the what?
The invoice is from the Temecula, California dealership, not yours.
I have no idea what their version or what they would say SARE stands for.
Okay.
I don't know what their terminology is that they use.
All right. So on this model, the Honda Odyssey 2008, both the front and the back, they both have the same type of brakes, which is rotors and pads, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Why do some people say drums and shoes? Is that a typo on some of these invoices?
Some vehicle has drums in the rear.
Uh-huh.
Some have rotors in the rear.
Okay, on this model though, they are rotors, correct?
On this model, they are rotors.
Okay. And so shoes are kind of like pads for drums, huh?
Correct.
Okay, that's for other models, huh?
Correct.
All right, Dave. So I appreciate you answering my questions, and I really think that it's a good idea to advise your customers to get the brakes done looked at every year with your repeat customers when they need to have the brakes looked at. Because if somebody doesn't address it, it's just like I think that there's so many car accidents that are caused every year because people just don't know. And if Honda can't work with their customers, who could they depend on if they can't depend on their mechanic?
I understand what you're saying.
Okay, Dave. Thank you. Hello, Rick. How are you?
Hello, good morning.
This is the Honda in Temecula, right?
Yes, sir.
So you did a lot of work for my mom named Linda Teal. I just have a few questions about some of the work that you did. I have some invoices. Could I give you those invoice numbers?
Yes. Let me pull up her file also. That way I have the whole file on the screen here. What's the phone number we have on her file?
Probably area code 203.
Got Got it. And this would be 17 CRV?
It's a 2008 Honda Odyssey.
I see that one also. Okay, good.
Yeah, she's been going to you guys for many years, so she's a good customer.
Got it. Okay, I got her on the screen now, and then which invoice did you want me to bring up in particular?
Okay, so I wrote down all the invoices and where you did work on the brakes. I guess we could start at invoice number 301816.
Okay.
And in that invoice, it says that customer requests a soft brake pedal recall. And you had to put a cap, a modulator, and then put a new brake fluid and sealant.
Right.
So was that a recall on that model?
Yes, that was a recall.
And so it was a recall on the cap and modulator, I guess, huh?
Correct, yeah. And then they bled out the system too, yeah. I see that in 2010 on that invoice you mentioned, 301816, correct?
301816, right. Because then she was back at the end of June, a couple weeks after you did that recall. And she started to complain that the brakes do not grab when you need to stop abruptly. And that was invoice number 303196.
I do see that one also, yes sir.
And it says that you guys checked the rear brakes and the front brakes, and they were both at 7 millimeter.
Correct.
Okay. And then she comes back in October, and that's invoice number 312484. And this is the one that I have a question about. So this is like 4 months later, and she's still complaining of the brakes not working too well. And so you have two comments. You first write that you test drove the car 3 times and found no problem at this time. And then a line or two down, another note is rotors are glazed, need to turn rotors and install new pads. So we were a little bit unsure about what you meant about that you drove the car and there was no problem, and then also that you need to install new pads.
484, there it is right there. Yeah, let me read the details on this one.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Looks like the original concern that day was growl type sound when braking. And I think based off what they were hearing that particular day, they were just noting there is some glazing on the rotors. They did clean the rear shoes and drums just to see if they could get rid of some of that noise. After that, it looks like they determined the rest of the noise at times was coming from front. So if the customer wanted to proceed and get rid of the noise 100%, that would be the next step, resurfacing the rotors and replacing the pads. 484.
So what was the total on servicing the rear brakes, sir? What was the total on that?
$41.
$41. Do you have any idea why that's not appearing on the invoice that you gave her?
Let me check. No. So you're saying the $41 is not showing on that original invoice that she has?
That's right. I have invoice 312484, page 1 and page 2. I see the total is $33.24.
Well, the $41 would be on invoice 405-484. The 41 would be on that invoice.
Okay, I'm referring to invoice number 312484.
312484. Let's see here.
She brings the car in for an oil change. She has a complaint that the brakes are still not working too well. And you write 2 notes on it. First, that you test drove car 3 times and found no problem. Second, rotors glazed, need to turn rotors and install new pads. It doesn't say anything about any servicing on the rear brakes, sir. And the total is $33.24 for, I guess, an oil change.
That is correct. I was looking at a different invoice. I'm sorry. So
Yes,
what's the question on 312-484 now?
The question is, first you write, you test drove the car 3 times and found no problem. And then later on you write, rotors are glazed, need to turn rotors and install new pads. So it seems like the information is conflicting. She's coming in and saying, I have a problem with my brakes yet again. She's complained to you about that like for the last 3 times she's been in. And you first write that you test drove the car 3 times and there's no problem. And then another note is that she needs new brake pads. And then she's let go without any work done. So she's
Okay, I see it here. Let me dig into that one and read the details here.
okay.
Sorry about that. I got on a different invoice and I was looking at.
Right, this is 312-484. This is the 3rd time she's come in complaining about poor brakes.
Yeah, I see the different lines. This is the one where I see noise. Customer reports a brake drone hum noise.
Yep.
When comes to a stop. Worse after it gets warm. Yeah, that's what I see right there. The other concern was the low pedal, and then the slider door, and then the oil change.
Right, so my question is, she's complaining for 3 times in a row that there's a problem with her brakes. And then on this 3rd time you write, you took the car for a test drive and you find no problem. And then you also write that she needs new brake pads, and then she's let go without any work done on her brakes. So my question is, why is it like that?
Right. From what I could get reading the notes, the unable to duplicate the concern was regarding the low pedal and the pressure on the pedal, low pedal. The noise concern, the drone noise, was basically just that noise at times under certain conditions, like the note says, more so when hot. Not necessarily low pad life as far as a concern, but noise on the rotors and pads, glazing. So they did suggest if we want to get rid of the noise, that would be the next step. But based off his notes, what I'm seeing there is that the pad life was not low, so it wasn't an urgency, it wasn't a safety issue, it was more of a noise intermittently. And that's what it looks like from the notes on that visit, those 2 concerns.
Yeah, so you don't write the millimeter on the pads there on this invoice. All I know is that my mom, she is an English teacher, and she's a good customer. If you recommended she needs brake work and she's coming into you complaining that the brakes don't seem to be working right, she'll be the first person in line to get new brakes put on. So I don't know why she's being let go without any work done on her brakes when she's complaining a few times in a row. So the next time she's in talking about brakes is another invoice. It's invoice number 321768. And that's again 4 months later in February of 2011. And then she's again requesting that her brakes be checked.
I do see that, yeah, because there's brake check. Let's see what the measurements were there. Front brakes at 4.5 millimeters, rears are at 6.5. Yeah, so above the service limits at that point in time. So yeah, I don't see any work performed. And no other notes on that one, 768.
Right, so last time she was in, you guys wrote down that she may need new brake pads. And then she's let go without any work done on her brakes. And then she's back again 4 months later, again complaining that even though the pads may have 4.5 on them, they're still giving her a problem. And again, you guys don't do any work on the brakes.
Yeah, on that 768, I don't see an issue reported, but I do see the note here, check brakes, yes.
All right, yeah, customer request brakes to be checked.
Correct.
So in her mind, that's a problem. She wouldn't request her brakes be checked four times in a row. And the last few times she was saying that they weren't grabbing when she had to stop abruptly. That she said they were making strange noises. And then on this one, she's requesting that the brakes be checked. And yet again, you guys don't service the brakes. You don't take them apart and re-grease them or anything. You don't put in new brake pads, even though you recommended to do that in the last time. So It seems to me that you guys lost out on some money with that one. She would have paid you for new brake pads.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think in some cases we try to make sure we give the customer the option that, hey, we don't want to suggest anything that doesn't need to be done, or we don't want to suggest anything too early. Because in some cases, you can get the other side of the situation where, a customer can say, hey, my brakes were at 4.5. Why did you tell me I have to do the brakes right now? The limit is, once I get under 3 and never to be below 2. Why did you have me do the brakes at 4.5? So I think in some cases, if everything's operating normally, they did not confirm a low pedal, they did not confirm any issues stopping. Part of her concern was noise, and sometimes brakes do make noise. Sometimes they get glazed, they get wear and tear. Some people do want to do the brakes as early as possible, not to have to worry about it. But then, like I said, we have other customers that, also are concerned about, hey, why did I do my brakes early? There was really nothing wrong with it. I was just hearing a noise once in a while, and I wanted to make sure there was no issue. If you're telling me they're safe and sound, they're a little noisy at times, I'll wait and do the brakes when they're ready. So I think we try to give the customer that option whenever we can.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense if that was the case, but it seems that she kept on coming in again and again, complaining about all sorts of problems. So I would think that you guys would want to do that, even if it's not down at 2.
True.
It still has some.
There's definitely an option there to do that. You're right.
So you guys at Honda recommend that people have their brakes serviced every 20,000 miles. Is that a good estimate of when everybody should get their brakes serviced?
And when you say service, you mean replaced?
No.
No.
The other guy, I have a dealership near me. The van is now in New Hampshire, and so the service manager in Keene Honda, he said that every 20,000 miles, if you guys service the brakes, which is take them apart and you re-grease them, and you make sure that they're in order, that will prolong the life of the brake pad if you have them serviced every year. Is that correct? Or?
I've never heard of that. I've never heard of that being a recommended service to do every 20,000 miles to prolong the life of the pad. I think the only thing that would perhaps help in is maybe keeping them quiet, minimizing the noise. But by no means would it affect the rotor and the pad wear in between the two. The surface between those two are going to wear as fast or as slow as the car is being driven. So I could only see the lubrication and the taking apart perhaps to prevent noise, dryness, anything like that.
Okay.
Nothing that we recommend every 20,000 miles, no.
Okay, so I'll disregard what he said, and for people with any type of car, when should they be on the lookout for new brake pads? Every 40,000 miles, every 2 years, every 50,000?
That's a good question. I mean, it's hard to even put an average on it, but maybe we can go with Honda. We can say maybe an average with most Hondas is 30,000 miles or so. 30,000, somewhere in there.
Right.
But it is gonna vary on model to model, year to year. Some of the Hondas will do much more, and then there's some that'll do less. So it just depends.
Yeah, because everybody knows that when the car reaches about 3,000 miles, you need a new oil change, or otherwise your car might get damaged, your engine might seize. So everybody knows that, but nobody really has an exact figure when they need to get their brakes done. It's just kind of like up there in limbo. So I'm thinking that it would be a lot safer for everybody on the road if people kind of had a brake meter, just like an oil meter. You know when to get your oil changed. You should know when to get your brake pads changed, and that might cut down on so many accidents on the road.
Yeah, it does make sense. I hear you there. It makes sense to me.
So you're saying every 30,000 you should have them looked at to see if the pads need to be replaced or something, huh?
Visual checks are normally done, every oil change, every 500 miles. Visual checks are done on a regular basis. Should always be done on a regular basis with the Honda. Visual checks. You can see if the pad is getting low on a visual check from the inside of the wheel when the car's in the air getting the oil drained. So visual inspections should be done pretty much every oil change, so you get a visual that makes sure they're not getting too low.
Yeah, that sounds good. I didn't know if you had to take the wheels off for a rotation to really take a good look at the brakes or not.
Yeah, and that's a good point. You know, half the time we're doing an oil change, or maybe even more than half, we're doing a tire rotation, you know what I mean? So when a tire rotation is done, you know, boom, there's even a better opportunity to do a visual. So that's done every time for sure, yes.
Right. So, just continuing on with this, in June of 2011, she has an invoice number 329542.
Mm-hmm.
And so 5,000 miles have gone by, and customers now saying brakes are grinding. And so Honda resurfaced the front rotors, and they install new front brake pads. And then they say everything is okay with the rear brakes. So when a car goes 50,000 miles, would you say that that's a long time to go without the rear brakes being serviced? 45,541?
I wouldn't say it was a long time. No, I would say it just, you know, maybe above the average for that model.
Okay.
Yeah, so, you know, some people are easy on the brakes, and you're going to see the pad life last longer, and some people are a little harder on the brakes. So, I think, like I was telling you earlier, it's just kind of hard to put a finger on it when it comes to brake life. But 45,000, I mean, that's a good lasting pad there for the original, any pad, front or rear.
Okay, so after that, the next time she comes in for work on her brakes is quite some time later. It's now October 17th of 2013, and the mileage is now 77,688. And you guys put in new brake fluid, and that's that. So she comes back in November 11th of 2013, and that is invoice number 405484. And she is reporting of growling noise while braking. And you guys say that there's some glazing at rear shoes and the drums due to heat. So you deglazed shoes and drums, but you don't state the millimeter of the rear brake pads, so we don't know what they're down to. But the mileage is now 91,109, and she's still on the same brake pads for the rear. So those are some brake pads you have in the rear. Those were like the Superman of all brake pads, huh?
It does seem like it, yeah. Let me,
I don't think brake pads usually go for 91,000, do they, sir?
Not on the average. I normally don't see that very often for the rear, no.
Right, you were saying like every 30,000, so if she's
30,000, yeah. But I do see front, yeah, we've done the fronts plenty versus the rear, huh? I see that. So there's a question mark, like, why are the rears lasting so long? Were they replaced and we just missed it here somewhere? That's what I'm looking for, too.
Yeah, I was real careful to go over her whole record, and I read over this quite a few times, and I'm quite positive that you did not do any work on the rear brakes for 91,000 miles, with the exception of what's called deglazing shoes and drums. So what does deglaze even mean? Does that mean machine them, or what is...
Normally, when they deglaze, they do it by hand because the glazing sometimes will set in a spot where you literally have to do it by hand and just get some of that glaze off the rotor or the drum.
Is it done with a brush?
And then
like a brush and a chemical, sir, or what?
Sometimes it's literally a like sandpaper type situation, you know. That's what'll get the glaze and brake clean.
Yeah, so I'm just, I was concerned about my mom bringing it in, complaining of a growling noise, and it's now 91,000 miles, and she's still on the original rear brake pads. So.
No, I could see your concern there. The other thing we do have to remember, I'm still surprised by how long the brakes lasted as far as the rears, just like you are. But the other thing we do have to keep in mind is the rear brake setup on this particular vehicle is a shoe and a drum. So it's got a combination. Obviously, that's not typical on most models. Usually you have either discs in the back or drums in the back, right?
Yeah, I thought that this Honda Odyssey had a disc in the rear, but you guys are writing shoes and drums on one of these invoices, so I wanted you guys to double check that. The guy over here says that there's disc brakes in the back. The service manager at Honda of Keene, New Hampshire. So you guys are writing drums and shoes. So I don't know what.
Well, most Odysseys, and I can confirm by VIN number, of course, because it does vary by VIN and year in production. Most Odysseys will have that combination deal I was explaining to you. They'll literally have a rotor. That's a combination. It's a pad. It's a disc. And there's a drum on the inside of it. And the drum is for the shoes and the drums, and that's more so for the emergency brake. But it also does assist in normal braking. And then you have the pad on the outer side. So most Odysseys in that year range do have that exact setup, and that does change sometimes the braking operation where they're just going to last long like shoes normally do, right? Shoes will last you 100,000 miles easy. In most cases, brake shoes versus brake pads.
Yeah, I can call you back with the VIN number. I don't have the VIN number on me, but yeah, the guy over here says they're disc in the back, so I don't know. But moving on, sir, she brings the car next in February of 2015. It's invoice number 448753. She wants a tune-up and a tire rotation, and there's no mention that she needs any brake work. And the mileage is now 118,890. So once again, those are some brake pads, because you guys have a good look at the brakes, I guess, with the tires being off. So I've never in my life heard of a brake pad lasting for 118,890.
True. I see that right there.
So you guys, I don't know. You weren't writing the millimeters either. So I guess in January of 2017 is the next time she comes in and mentions brakes. And the mileage is now 145,353. And that invoice is 525078. And you guys replaced the rear pads. So finally the rear pads are being replaced in January of 2017. And that's the first time the pads are replaced in 145,000 miles. So I'm worried for her safety when she has something like that going on with Honda. She trusts you guys. She thinks that you guys are the best because you are Honda and this is a Honda. So I just get nervous that my mom's driving around with brake pads that have 145,000 miles on them. So I'm glad.
True, yeah. No, I understand where you're coming from. Obviously, we want to replace them if there's any issue or concern or they're low. You know, it's straightforward. If the pads are low, let's replace them. If something ain't working right, let's replace them. I'm with you 100% there.
Right, so you guys do not write the millimeter of the pads. And I guess you don't need to resurface the rotors. So,
typically in the rear, no. Typically in the rear, not.
Typically in the rear, nobody ever resurfaces the rotors, sir?
Here we don't. In some places they do. We normally don't recommend. What you got to remember too with the rear rotors, the rear rotor is just thinner to begin with versus the front. Very, very thin rotor to begin with. So if you start resurfacing your rear rotors, you're going to need new rear rotors very quickly. So in most cases, because the rear doesn't do a lot of the braking and the rear does minimal braking compared to the front, the resurface is typically safe for the front because that's where all the wear and tear goes.
Okay, so you guys never resurfaced the rear rotors, only about replacing the rear rotors, huh?
Yeah, typically if we're going to do the pads in the rear, it's just a pad replacement. Clean up the rotor. Rotor doesn't measure up to the specifications, and we're going to recommend new rear rotors and new rear pads.
Right. So the car at that point, when you put the new rear pads on, had 145,000 miles on it. So then we transfer that minivan to New Hampshire. And on August 5th of 2020, there's an invoice. I don't know if you'll have it on your record because this is through a different Honda.
Right.
But it's invoice 795272. And they have said the rear brake pads have seized on the rear rotors. And the rear rotors are so bad, they have to be replaced. So that is, let's see, it's about 30,000 miles after she has had the rear pads put on by your dealership. So 30,000 miles go by, about a year and a half, and they have said that the rear pads have seized on the rear rotors. So we've gone from pads lasting 145,000 miles to the rear pads seizing on the rear rotors in 30,000. So is there any way that you could diagnose that situation and give me your best guess of what happened there, sir?
Seized on the rear rotor, so it sounds like maybe they went metal to metal or they went down to the sensor. Kind of hard to say when they say seized on the rotor. That's not a typical description. But I would have to say the pad, where did it say anything about going metal on metal with brake pad?
Yeah, let me get that invoice. 1 second, all right?
It looks like the check engine light. One quick sec, sir. I'm going to just switch phones here. Is that okay to hold?
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh, you're welcome. Oh, you're welcome.
You're in touch with the DC.
Okay, thanks for holding, sir.
Yeah, they've written that rear brake pads have seized, and the rotors are overheating, so the rotors have to be replaced. And they did not recommend that I drive it. They recommended that they were so bad that I leave the car there all weekend. I brought it in like on a Thursday, and they said, we don't recommend you picking it up. We can't get to it until the next week, but the rear brakes are so bad, we recommend that you leave it here.
Gotcha.
So I drive like an old woman. I go out of my way to allow enough time to stop when I'm approaching any type of intersection or stop sign. And I really baby the car. So it is interesting to me that the brake pads first lasted for 145,000 miles. And then when we have the car up here, 30,000 miles go by, and now the rear brake pads are seizing on the rear rotors that have to be replaced.
Yes, I understand that concern too.
So do you have any professional analysis about why that could have happened?
You know, from going to one extreme to the other, and obviously 30,000 miles or so isn't an extreme, but it seems like it's in the average zone. 140,000 miles seems like it's really far mileage out to get on original brake pads. The only time I normally see something like that drastically change is when the driver of the vehicle has changed or the driving conditions have changed, the patterns, you know what I mean, the daily routine and all that kind of stuff. That's the only time I see a drastic change. But there's still a really good question. I mean, 140,000 miles, you know, your mom must have been driving that car as soft as anybody could drive a Honda Odyssey to get that kind of mileage out of rear pads. That's still a mind-blowing, you know, mileage feat on rear brake pads. So there's, you know, not taking anything away from that. Still a big question mark, like how did she do that? But as far as your situation that you experienced 30,000 miles later, went metal to metal, we're guessing, or seized or something. All I can say is that something went quickly on the brake pad. I don't know if maybe one of the calipers started going bad or sticking. There's little slider pins on the calipers. Sometimes those things will just get old and they'll stick. And then the brake pad wear will become very fast and drastic. That's the only thing I could estimate in something like that. It doesn't necessarily always need to be replaced when that issue happens, but the pin would be freed up and lubricated along with the new brake pad replacement as standard. That's the only thing I can imagine on something like that.
Okay, so once again, there's no way to do that work, lubricate the calipers or kind of like service the brakes to make the brake pads and the brakes last longer all around. There's no way to do that. The guy over here was saying if you get the brakes serviced every 20,000 miles, it prolongs the life of the brake pads and the brakes. So are you saying servicing the calipers? Are you kind of saying that the brakes should be serviced every year, every 20,000?
I mean, I think it would be going above and beyond just to be, proactive, just to make sure there's nothing that can go wrong. I mean, it's something that happens isolated, you know what I mean? So it's nothing real consistent, but it is going above and beyond. It's probably not a bad idea. Obviously, you're going to pay a little extra to do something like that periodically, every 20,000 miles or so. But it can't hurt, right? It's going above and beyond.
Yeah.
Is it in your owner's manual? Is it a routine thing they recommend? Does Honda put it in the maintenance schedule? No. It's not one of those things, but it's definitely not a bad idea. You're going above and beyond,
Yeah, I appreciate your time on this, and I would like to think that I'm going above and beyond, but the truth is, if there's really no set schedule and nobody's really conscious of this sort of thing, I think that may be the reason why some people are getting into so many car accidents every year. Every year, I think car accidents is like the #1 cause of death in America. And I wonder how many people are getting in car accidents because they're driving around with failing brakes. So if people were more conscious about that, and I'm not a big guy for regulations and more laws and more BS from the government, I'm just more into people being more conscious about stuff. And that includes me, the consumer, but it also includes you as our mechanic, because I don't know much about mechanics. And my mom certainly does not. So we count on you guys to be on top of that when we bring them in. And if we can't count on the mechanics being conscious of that, there's really nobody that we could count on. So I like hearing that whenever a car is brought in for an oil change, that you guys do a visual inspection of the brakes. I think that is a great principle. And I think that you guys should advertise that on your car commercials, and you'll stand apart from all the dumb car commercials of people driving up and down the street. You could tell the people on your commercials how much you care about the customers by checking their brakes every time they come in for an oil change, because Honda is into saving lives. So that sounds real good, and that's what I'm sure Honda would like to support and advertise themselves as. And not a company that will let someone drive for $145,000 on the same brake pads. That's something I'm sure Honda will not be proud of, right?
Correct. I think you're right.
All right, sir. Thank you for your time today.
You're welcome. You have a good one. Thank you, sir.
What was your name, sir?
My name is Rick.
Rick? All right,
Yes,
Rick.
sir.
Rick from Temecula Honda. Thank you for your time, sir. Goodbye.